Hello and welcome to this month's Rights in Russia interview. It's October 31st, 2024, and our guest today is Sergei Davidis, who is from Moscow and one of Memorial's leading figures now in exile. He currently heads Memorial's program to support political prisoners. For many years, he has been responsible for compiling the lists of Russia's political prisoners and advocating on their behalf in national and international forums. After doing his compulsory military service in the North Caucasus, Sergei Davidis studied sociology at Moscow State University and then law at Moscow State Academy of Law. In 2019, he was a Galina Starovoitova Fellow on Human Rights and Conflict Resolution at the Woodrow Wilson International Center in Washington. As well as a human rights advocate in the Memorial organization, he has been an active participant in Russia's pro-democracy movement. In December 2008, he was a founding member of the Solidarnost movement. During the 2011 and 12 elections, he was one of the organizers of the protests against election fraud and was a founding member of the 5 December Party, named for the day when protests broke out over election fraud. He also took part in organizing anti-war protests in Moscow after the annexation of Crimea in 2014 and against Russia's involvement in the war in Syria in 2016. In 2021, Sergei was jailed for 10 days for calling for people to join a protest in support of Alexei Navalny. At the end of that year, the Russian authorities closed down Memorial, and in March 2022, shortly after the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, he and his family left Russia and currently live in Lithuania, from where he continues to head Memorial's program to support political prisoners. Welcome to Rights in Russia, Sergei Davidis.
Thank you very much for invitation. Hi to everybody, and it's absolutely comprehensive description of my activity.
Great. To start with, I'd like to ask you a very broad but fundamental question. Why, in your view, are human rights important? And how did you yourself become involved in human rights work?
I think that human rights are important because this is the base of democratic society, where everybody can be sure of his or her safety and doesn't depend on arbitrary actions and decisions made either by authorities or by private entities. Everybody wants to be safe, but often people do not understand that their safety and their rights can be guaranteed only if safety and rights of others are guaranteed, that it should be the system working for everybody. But I am sure that, and not only I think it's rather obvious, that it's a base. We all want rights for ourselves, and it means that we should also provide these rights to all the other people. And as for my choice to work in this sphere, actually, I was a supporter of democratic future of Russia from my childhood. It happened so that I was listening to foreign radio stations in the 80s, and later actively participated in perestroika events. It was my natural choice, democracy in Russia, and it's tightly connected with human rights. But I was not professionally, I was a supporter, to say so, of human rights. I shared the idea of rule of law and so on. But actually, I was not practically involved and professionally involved in human rights activity until the beginning of 20 when Putin came to power, because when I was young, after Soviet Union collapsed and we came to relatively democratic Russia, I believed, as many other people believed then, that we are going in right direction and we can let these experienced and educated people in power to provide further movement to democracy. Unfortunately, it was a mistake, not only mine, but also of Russian people in general. We haven't managed to control our authorities, to demand that our country moves to democracy, and we received what we have now. But when I saw the signs of opposite movement from democracy in the very beginning of Putin's rule, I joined, I can say, human rights activity connected with Chechen war. It was volunteer activity connected with description of the events, participation in public rallies against the war, and so on. And later, when rather many political prisoners appeared in Russia again, because there were no, or at least no political prisoners in the 90s, I began working in this sphere, supporting of political prisoners, participating in advocacy events on behalf of them. And the further we were going toward authoritarian rule, the more important it seemed to participate in human rights activity, because they were more and more threatened and violated by the Putin's regime. And since then, since 2008, I think, I work in the framework of memorial organizations and continue to do it now from Lithuania.
What's your sense of how many political prisoners there are in Russia today? And has that number changed over the years?
For sure, it has sufficiently changed, and it grew a lot since the beginning of our observations. But the question about the number is rather difficult question, because we have 778 or 77 in our list today. But this number only shows the lower margin of total number of political prisoners in Russia. Russia is a big country, you know, and it's rather difficult to get information about all the cases of politically motivated and unlawful deprivation of liberty. Many people do not know that there are human rights defenders, that there is civil society, and they can get some support from the society, and they do not inform anybody about their persecution. And anyway, we include people in our lists generally after studying the materials of their cases, because we have to prove that the persecution, the deprivation of liberty meets to the criteria of political prisoner. So there are cases when we do not have to prove anything, because, for example, when people are persecuted according to unlawful and anti-constitutional legislation, like these well-known new articles of criminal code about dissemination of fake news about the use of Russian army, or discrediting Russian army. But there are many cases when you cannot judge about unlawfulness and political motivation of persecution if you do not have the plot of accusation, the proofs which the accusation is based on. So we cannot include many people in whose prosecution we see some signs of political motivation and unlawfulness, but when we cannot prove it for sure. So, and there are a lot of cases who are even formally secret. Like, for example, the majority of the cases about high treason. We just do not know what people are exactly charged of, what is the plot of accusation. And in the most cases, we cannot include them in our list. So and today, for example, we have, as our Ukrainian colleagues estimate, not less than 7,000 Ukrainian civic hostages in Russia. They all are political prisoners for sure, but unfortunately, we know even the names only of minority of them. So we can estimate the number, but we cannot include them in the lists. So totally, I would say that there are about 10,000 political prisoners in Russia. We are working on making more comprehensive lists. We face some technical and substantial difficulties preparing that, but we hope that in a few months we will be able to provide much more real list, not list of political prisoners, but list of those whose deprivation of liberty has obvious signs of political motivation and violation of law, because for sure we compile this list not only just to inform the world about the situation. For sure, it's sufficient reason of our activity, but the second and probably more important reason why we compile and maintain this list is to provide possibility of solidarity with them. We make list where people can find the details of the cases for sure, details of situation of these concrete people, and the instrument to support them, their addresses in prisons, and they are able to write letters to them to support them, their bank accounts of their families or of the groups supporting them in order to donate for support of this certain prisoner. And for sure, this possibility of solidarity should not depend on inclusion to our list of political prisoners. And it's absolutely unfair to make people wait until we study all the details and include them to the list. And now we also have more than a few hundred people on our website whom we haven't included to the list of political prisoners at the moment, but support to whom we offer to all the people who are eager to support some of political prisoners.
Mhm. Memorial, I mentioned before that Memorial was closed down by the Russian authorities. And so could you just say a little bit about how the organization is functioning, either inside Russia, outside Russia, and what has happened to their staff, to the Memorial staff?
Actually speaking, two memorial organizations were closed down by the state, International Memorial and Human Rights Center Memorial. And I mainly involved in the activity of Human Rights Center Memorial. Uh, and actually speaking, memorial community is rather complicated structure. It's a network. It included dozens of memorial organizations in many regions of Russia and abroad, and not all of them were shut down, but only International Memorial, which was a legal entity of this network, uniting all the organizations, but not the leading structure which could order the other institutions what to do. And our separate organization, Human Rights Center Memorial, was also closed. So now a lot of people had to leave Russia for sure, if we speak about memorial movement as whole. But many of them are still in Russia and continue their activity, both connected with historical memory and with current human rights situation. For sure, there are much more difficulties for their activities. They cannot be too public and so on, but they continue this activity. We have, if you speak about Human Rights Center Memorial, we organized new association, a Human Rights Defense Center Memorial. For sure, it is not registered in Russia because we cannot get official registration, but actually there is no necessity to get it. But anyway, we exist as a kind of legal entity, but not registered one. And technically, we continue our activity via many real legal entities in different countries, and dozens of people who are connected with Memorial, who worked for Memorial, are spread in many countries of the world. But this activity is continued, both our activity connected with current human rights situation, I mean activity of Human Rights Defense Center, and activity connected with enlightenment and restoration of historical memory, which is the main aim of some other memorial organizations.
I'd like to turn now to some of your pro-democracy activities. And first, I'd like you to comment on the case of Alexei Navalny, whom you knew well. And could you tell us what kind of person he was? Why did he return to Russia? What do we know about his death? And thirdly, why wasn't he exchanged, as happened later with other human rights and pro-democracy activists, such as Karamurza and Oleg Orlov?
These are rather difficult questions. Also, I cannot say that I was a friend or too close to Alexei, but for sure I collaborated with him and met him many times. And I witnessed it in his court trial. Not the second, because actually he had so many trials, but not the last one, but those when in which he was charged with embezzlement of donations without any grounds, absolutely. And so people who donated to him, to his structures, came to the court, which was organized in the prison, came to say that they do not consider that the donations were stolen or improperly used. For sure, it has no effect, but it was already after the beginning of full-fledged war in February, in the end of February or the very beginning of March 2022. And even then, he was absolutely optimistic and brave. You can imagine that then, in the very beginning of full-fledged war, everybody felt absolutely suppressed. This was absolutely awful new reality. Many of us didn't expect that it can happen, but it was difficult to tolerate this reality. And when we came to this court and had possibility to exchange a few words with Alexei, not to communicate him personally and not to come closely to him, but just to speak a little bit through the hall where the trial was taking place, he actually cheered all of us. All of us came out of, went out from this prison with a much more optimistic mood, I would say. He was able to encourage people. He had an absolute political talent. It's not about personal communication, probably, but it was very important to understand him. He was brilliantly optimistic and cheerful person. And as for his decision to return to Russia, I actually do not have any insights about it. He explained his decision, and I believe what he was explaining. He considered himself as a Russian politician, responsible for the future of our country, and he believed that he should share the destiny of the country. He should be inside the country in order to have the right to call people for some actions, to be heard, to be understood, and so on. Now, as we can get from the book published a few days ago, he foresaw that he can be assassinated there, and it makes his choice even much more brave and sacrificing, I would say, if it's possible to say so. And I know that many people say that he had not returned to Russia because he could do much more from abroad, being alive. For sure, now we can say that probably since he's assassinated today, it would be more useful not only for him but for Russian civil society, for prospects of Russian opposition, for the prospects of democracy in Russia if he stay out of the country. But nobody knows the future, and it was his responsible choice. He expected to overcome all the obstacles. Unfortunately, he could not foresee that the war broke out, and it influenced the brutality of Putin's regime a lot. Probably his estimations were right for situation before, the full-fledged war. But unfortunately, situation had sufficiently changed after 24th of February. Unfortunately, I do not possess any public details of his assassinations. I know what everybody knows. It seems that there is a rather high probability of intended assassination. But even if it is not the case, anyway, it is murder. The conditions uh, under which he was conducted, uh, all the violations of his rights, deprivation of food, sleep, medical treatment, and so on, and it relates to the person who was attempted to be assassinated and marvelously survived. So for sure, anyway, it is a murder. And I hope we are going to get more details and full truth about this in some distant future. Speaking about the prospects of his swap, of his participation in potential swap, there is a version, probably that he was assassinated exactly because of these prospects, because he was a real leader, real political leader, very influential person, and Putin tried to make him silent behind the bars, but failed to do it. He imprisoned his lawyers to keep him silent, but anyway, he failed to do it. And it seems rather reasonable that opposite to all the other opposition figures, so political prisoners who were released 3 months ago, Putin did not dare to release Alexei. He wanted to swap his agent, killer Krasikov, and some other spies, fraudsters, and so on, but did not want to change them with Alexei Navalny. He was ready to change him to somebody else. What happened later? It seems quite reasonable version, but we do not know details, unfortunately.
Do you think it's realistic to believe that Russia will become a democratic country in the future? And maybe kind of, I think, based on your experience in the US when you were a fellow at the Wilson Center, I mean, were there things that you saw that in the US that maybe a future democratic Russia should avoid?
I absolutely believe that Russia will become a democracy, and for sure it's the reason why I participate in this activity. I believe that it's useful for the future of our country and our people. And I believe in that because not only I do not see any principal difference between Russian people and people of democratic countries, but the scientists who study values and attitudes of different nations, they conclude that the Russians are closer to the European neighbors than to, for example, Asian nations. So it's quite natural for Russia to have a political regime similar with what its European neighbors have. And actually, it's completely obvious that the problems, the needs of Russian people cannot be solved and answered by the dictatorship. Economically, it's impossible to develop the country under this regime. It can be relatively successful in the short-term period, but not in long-term period. When Russian people have to look for new answers to the questions they face. I'm sure that anyway, at last, they will have to choose democracy. Probably it will be Russia sufficiently different from what we have now, even from territorial point of view. But I'm sure that it will happen. But for sure, we do not know how soon it happens, because even I witnessed and participated in one attempt, and we had another attempt to make Russia a democratic country in the beginning of 20th century. Both these attempts failed. And anyway, we will have the third attempt. I think it should happen relatively soon, because the second one now came to absolute failure, and it cannot, this situation cannot last for too long time. And if and each iteration is shorter than previous one. This attempt completely is completely became completely unsuccessful in 30 years, even probably earlier. And I think we will make the third attempt, and if it is, even if it also fails, there will be the fourth one, and the period will be shorter.
Mhm.
And as for US model, I think there is no sense to speak exactly about United States. Their democracy is relatively specific, mm, because the history differs from the history of European countries. I think that Russia, as European country, has much more templates in European experience. For sure, there are some institutions common for all the democracies, and for sure they will also be practiced in Russia. But if you speak about social responsibility of the state and many other aspects, the way how the rule of law is organized, I think we shall use European experience, not American one.
That many pro-democracy and human rights activists have left Russia. Like yourself, it's estimated that there may be as many as 900,000 Russian citizens that have left since the 24th of February. So to what extent, in your view, do people in exile share common goals and work together? And are they, or to what extent are they maybe divided in their opinions?
For sure, there were people who left Russia just in order not to participate in the war, not to be mobilized. It's a very good reason, and they should be respected for their desire not to participate in this war, even if they just were afraid for themselves. But for sure, among this wave of refugees, there were some people, sufficient share of people who did not share democratic values, our understanding of human rights, and so on. But I think that at least majority of active people, of people who are vocal abroad, are supporters of human rights, are supporters of democracy in Russia, and a lot of them are trying to do what they can to move the country in these directions. For sure, we are not able to change the country and throw Putin away immediately, but we can try to influence in order to provide, I would say, a combination of our influence with some external factors on the front line, economical factors, and so on, when we get such a possibility, windows of possibilities, and so on. And for sure, Russian pro-democracy opposition, if it's possible to say so, Russian pro-democracy people abroad divided. It's quite natural for a situation when we do not have simple, clear path to achieve what you want. We can take the history of Russian opposition before 2017, when many left activists were in exile. We can take post-revolution diaspora, when many opponents of Bolsheviks flew away, and it was similar situation. They were also divided because they had no possibilities to change situation in the country. When we see possibility to change situation, when external factors are combined with our efforts so that we see that the regime is weakened, I hope that we are united and work together. And now we are relatively divided, but generally we move to the same direction. And nobody knows what is the proper path to go to this direction. So I think it's even better that there are many paths used by different groups, and they appeal to different strata inside the country. They are able to convince different strata. So there is no tragedy that there is some division in our pro-democratic diaspora.
Can you say just a few words about what it's like on a personal basis, what it's like living in exile in Lithuania?
I didn't plan to leave the country. It was relatively unexpected for me. But my situation, I think, differs from situation of many Russians who had to leave the country, because I have the same job, the same work I had inside the country, and I believe that it's morally justified activity, and it gives some force. It supports internally that I understand that I do something that is really useful and important. And since I can earn my life due to this activity, it's especially convenient situation for me.
So I come to our last question, and that is there anything that people living in the US, Canada, the EU, the UK or other countries, is there anything they can do to support human rights in Russia?
For sure. And I think they can do a lot. Impact the authorities in order they support Ukraine, in order they support Russian pro-democracy movement, because it's important to support political prisoners inside the country. It's important to spread true information about the war, about human rights, to support independent media. It's important to help these hundreds of thousands of Russian people who are now out of the country to be organized somehow, and it is the first thing. The second thing, I think, is what people can do personally. They can support Russian political prisoners, because I'm involved in the activity connected with political prisoners. I probably make special accent on this issue. It's possible to write letters to political prisoners. These letters not only morally support those who are under the behind the bars, but they are somehow an instrument of defense, because if the administration of the penal facilities sees that they have sufficient support both from Russia and from abroad, they hesitate whether they can easily violate their rights. People can donate to Russian human rights organization, to organizations, to certain prisoners, because it often happens that donations are collected for certain purpose, to help this or that political prisoner or his family or something like that. It's important to spread information about Russian political prisoners. They should be visible, and they should be visible also because even if we are not able to release them now, when the war ends and there are attempts to settle the situation, and the Russian authorities demand to lead some sanctions, it's important that at this moment the issue of political prisoners is on the table, is an agenda, and the demand to release all the political prisoners should become one of the important conditions of any settlement, of any lifting of any sanctions. For sure, we can think of some other forms of activity, but at least these are obvious and important forms how people are able to help.
Thank you so much. That's a real concrete thing that people can do, and appreciate these suggestions. And I want to thank you, Sergei, for sharing your compelling history, your unique perspective with us on rights in Russia. We wish you the very best as you continue this important work in these challenging times.
Thank you very much for your attention to our work for Russian human rights movement and Russian democratic society. Thank you.